All right. Okay, so once again, thank you all so much for attending this informational webinar about the fiscal year 23 evidence-based programming grant. My name is Jessica Cleveland. I am an Assistant Director of Special Projects here at the Office of Criminal Justice Programs. We have a number of other OCJP staff, as well as representatives from the Governor's Office, from TCI, from TDOC, from the Department of Labor and Workforce Development. This is really a collaborative effort at the state level to empower the jails and local counties to provide evidence-based programming to their inmates. We've all been in communication and been a big part of this planning. So hopefully you'll see that reflected in the solicitation as well. We have a few goals for today's webinar. The first is for this group to gain an understanding of the purpose of the evidence-based programming initiative and how that fits into the Governor's Reentry Success Act of 2021 and the overall goals of criminal justice reform of this administration. We really want to support jails and create opportunities for successful reentry. The target group, the target sort of population to be served by these grants are felons or TDOC inmates serving their sentences in a local jail. However, as is stated throughout the solicitation, if you have misdemeanants in your jail who also have, through your assessment, have demonstrated a need for this programming, they are welcome to take part in that. We also want to understand which programming is allowable with these funds. So this isn't just sort of a free-for-all. This isn't open-ended. We have a very structured list of approved programming that these funds can be used for. And I'll go through that in detail. The links for all of that you'll see throughout this presentation, and you will also find them all over the solicitation, as well as on the scope document that you'll actually be filling out as part of your application process. And likewise, we want you to just have a decent understanding of the grant application process. We know there'll be subsequent questions after this, but I do want to give you a good idea of the deadlines, the links, the required steps, just how to go about starting this process, and then how to reach out with questions as those come up as you're working through this. Miranda's going to be monitoring the chat, so she'll let me know if you post a question in real time. Don't wait. If you have a question that pops up, if something is confusing or unclear, please just throw it in the chat and I'll be happy to address it as we go. This is, of course, also linked to, as part of the Reentry Success Act, this is linked to the TCI accreditation process. The evidence-based programming requirement is part of that accreditation process. There is a lot of information on TDOC's website, which in a minute I'm going to give you the links to, but just wanted to make sure that that's clear, that all of this is connected. We have done this in partnership with TCI and with TDOC. So if you are already in the process of seeking that accreditation, this should complement that. This isn't going to in any way interrupt that or be separate from that process. That specific issue in question came up earlier last week by an existing EBP grant holder. So I just wanted to make sure to make that clear for you all. So quickly, just some sort of context setting for why we feel like this is really, really important programming right now for the state of Tennessee. So we know that folks who commit violent crimes, they are often themselves victims of violent crime. That's something that's borne out in the data, not only in the state of Tennessee, but nationwide. And oftentimes, by virtue of their offender status, these individuals do not have adequate access to services that they might require in order to recover and heal from crimes that they themselves have experienced. There's some overwhelming statistic about folks who have committed violent crimes were overwhelmingly likely to have experienced or witnessed a violent crime even as a child. And so we know that that does long-term damage to communities and to families, and that just continuing to move forward and kind of ignore that overlap and that sort of victim offender interface that happens so much in these communities, that just creates this cycle, right? The cycle of trauma and of violence and incarceration, and especially at the local level, what you get are, these folks who just keep coming back, right? You have folks who just keep coming back into your jail, who keep getting arrested, and it just seems like there's really no solution. And so this is something that the state has looked closely at, and that is a priority for Governor Lee. We know that 60% of Tennessee felons will serve their sentence in a jail, not in a prison. And those folks are going home eventually. Those folks are going to get out and go back to their communities. And so the idea is to give them the resources and the programming that they need in order to have better success when they do return home to their communities. So this is all rooted in evidence-based programming. I know that probably seems like kind of like a catchphrase at this point that's used so much in some settings that it's sort of lost all meaning. In the context of this grant, as well as in the context of your TCI accreditation, evidence-based programming is very much rooted in a specific definition that can be found in Tennessee Code Annotated. It's referenced here at the bottom. It's also linked when you pull these slides if you want to download this PowerPoint presentation. There's also a lot of information about this on TDOC's website. This smart code that you see on the right here, you can use your phone right now and use that smart code to go to TDOC's website. Of course, you can also access it later at your convenience, but there is a lot of great information on that website about why evidence-based programming is really important for addressing long-term and short-term issues with corrections programming. I want to highlight that, according to the definition that we're working with, that includes programs focused on education, vocational training, mental health, substance abuse rehabilitation, and building healthy relationships. So I do want to take a moment to draw a distinction between evidence-based programming and work release, because this comes up. This has come up in the previous round of EBP funding that we did last year. So vocational programming, work skills development, and evidence-based programming, those things are different from work release. If you submit an application that is mostly just about inmates going out and doing some kind of labor in the community, that is not going to be adequate for the purposes of this solicitation. You can have some work release element in your application, but it needs to be coupled with evidence-based programming from the list, from the approved list, that complements that. And you can see here that would be something programming, therapeutic programming, mental health, substance abuse treatment. There are a lot of different choices, a lot of different types of programming that you could choose depending on the needs that your inmates are demonstrating. But I want to be clear that it's more than just they go out and do landscaping, or they go out and do litter cleanup or things like that. That might have a benefit of some kind. That is not what we are looking for. That is not adequate. So you need to make sure to think through that, read the solicitation carefully, and check out the lists of approved programming and make sure that they fit the state's definition of evidence-based programming. Miranda, anything in the chat?
No, not yet.
Okay, and I just want to encourage y'all to ask questions, even if you think even if it's not a question, even if it's sort of like a challenge to some of this, or if you're confused by some of this, I really encourage you to throw that in the chat, because I really want to take the opportunity to help you all understand as much as possible. So moving on, this is exactly how to go through the sort of the menu is what we can call it of approved evidence-based programs. So the last round, if you were familiar at all with it, we had this Pew Clearinghouse. We're using this Pew Clearinghouse again, but we're supplementing it with a couple of other lists of vocational programming that the state is already aware of and invested in. So I'll touch on that in a second. But this, for any kind of like substance abuse treatment, behavioral, family skills, social skills, anything like that that falls outside of just a vocational, program, like a straightforward vocational program, you need to be able to find that listed here in this Pew Clearinghouse. Now, TDOC's website goes into great detail about this clearinghouse, why it is the best one. It's actually a combination of 5 others that are combined. It's full of really good information. But briefly, I'll just say that if it's a valid program, it's going to be on here for the most part. I want you, so the link is posted throughout. It's on the solicitation and it's in the scope. You will go to that link and you see here on the screenshot in the corner, you'll select this box for the correctional facility setting. That's going to just help you weed out anything that really won't apply to your jail setting. And you can search. So you can search by keyword like substance abuse treatment. You can search for, a particular program that you may have heard of, but that this is going to be the menu. And so when you are filling out your scope, when you're answering those questions in the Word document that is the scope, you are going to literally list the program that you have found on this menu. And it needs to be one that is either highest rated or second highest rated. And all of that it's explained very clearly on the same page, on the Pew Clearinghouse page. It's very easy to use. And you can see there, it's noted with the color symbol under each one. If you have issues or difficulty using that, you can reach out to us and we can give you more guidance, but it should be pretty straightforward. What we had last time was folks would say, it's a 12-step program that we're going to use. And throughout their scope, they'd say this 12-step program. I need to know which specific 12-step program you are planning to use, because the model is what is evidence-based. The model is what defines how many facilitators are there, what's the curriculum, how long is the program, how many weeks, how many attendees in each class, is there independent workbook, work in between classes. That's all what makes it where it either works or it doesn't work. And so it has to be it has to be, tied to a specific model. And when we receive your applications and we go through your scopes, the first thing we're going to do is pull this up ourselves, this Pew Clearinghouse, and we're going to search for the programs that you have proposed, and we're going to look to see if they're in this system. And if they're not, that's going to be reflected in the score of your application, but we're also going to have to address that before we can go to contract and give you any of these grant funds. So you really want to make sure that that this is done appropriately. Okay. Oh, let's see. I just saw. Yes, Miranda. Let me see. I'm just gonna. Can you just read that, Miranda? I can't really go back and forth. Can you just read the comment?
Absolutely. This is required for accreditation as well as grant approval.
Yes. So that is. You said it was William Wall. Okay, yes. That's the director of TCI. That's the Tennessee Corrections Institute, and he's making the point that this evidence-based programming, kind of like what I said at the top, this evidence-based programming is the same definition because it's rooted in the Tennessee Code that was amended by the Reentry Success Act of 2021. So when TCI says EBP, they mean the same thing that we mean when we say EBP, because it's the same thing. And if you have questions about TCI's accreditation EBP stuff, if you have questions about our EBP stuff, that all can be found at TDOC's website. They have the information and then these helpful worksheets that go through why evidence-based programming is important and all of that. Okay, so we have evidence-based programming. A subset of evidence-based programming is vocational programming. They're not two different things. It's just that there are vocational programs that are operating successfully here in Tennessee, but those aren't going to be on the Pew list necessarily because they are unique to Tennessee. So what we have is a list of vocational programs currently operating in each TDOC prison. It is a spreadsheet that you can access from the website, from the solicitation document, and in the scope. And I think the way that I would recommend to use that is to pull it up and check it out. It lists things like barbering and culinary arts and welding, but it lists which prison they're happening in. And so it was suggested to me by a TDOC person that, it might be helpful to pick a prison that's close to your county, because that way it might be, an organization that's offering it there. A lot of these are offered by TCAT, so it might be, just more convenient to pick a program that TCAT's already doing, half an hour away 45 minutes away at a prison, that they can then help to replicate for your jail. Some of these are also just sort of taught by like individuals and stuff too. And so as you go through and you review that spreadsheet and you say, okay, this looks like a cool program that we would really be interested in. I think a lot of our inmates would go for this. Then you can reach out. If it says it's offered by TCAT, you could reach out directly to them, or you can reach out to TDOC to say, like, to that prison to say, hey, we're doing this project and we see that you're running this vocational program and we would like to do a version of that. And, what can you tell me about it? So that should all go into your sort of pre-planning. You'll see this again, but the deadline for this application is the end of July. It's July 29th. So the idea was to give you time to make these calls, have these conversations, and really plan, what you want to do with these funds. All right, so these are some, again, you don't have to memorize all of this. We're going to post this, but these are just kind of some logistics. So, sorry, I'm just moving something so I can read it easier. The deadline is July 29th. This is where you all, as the local government, the government agency operating the local jail, would be the one to apply. The reason that that's noted here is because it is totally fine for you to partner with a nonprofit to offer some kind of programming on site at your jail, but they can't directly apply for these funds. Your agency needs to apply, and then you would do a subcontract with that nonprofit in order to pay them to perform the service that you have, built into your application. So an example would be substance abuse treatment programming. If there is a nonprofit in your community who offers an evidence-based substance abuse program that is on the Pew list, it's validated, then you would contact them and get the information about how much is that going to cost? What are your needs for that? Like, do you have 2 part-time people who do that? Do you have 1 full-time person who does that? How much is the curriculum? What's your travel money going to look like? Like, what is it going to cost to bring this nonprofit into your jail to help provide this service. And then you would build that into your scope and into your budget. A difference from how we did the first round of these is that these grants are for 3 years. So you can build a program out. You have time to build something carefully and with intention. So if you want to have a long-term project with a nonprofit, you have a little bit of space to do that. If you want to bring a staff on as a county or municipal employee to do some of these services, you can do that. And the amount of money that you can apply for is larger this time around. So this is not going to apply to all of you because with, I would imagine, smaller municipalities, these are reimbursement based grants. So you don't get this money up front. You spend the money and then you invoice the state and we reimburse you for your expenses. But you can apply for up to $1 million for the 3 years. That would be $1 million over 3 years of programming. So the intention with that was to allow sort of a longer runway for more, in-depth programming building, and also a larger amount of money to allow you to maybe purchase the equipment that you need in order to do this programming, to bring on staff, to do any renovations to physical spaces in order to make this programming easier. There are some unallowables. We do have a good bit of flexibility with these funds because these are state funds, but there are a few unallowables. The first I want to flag is we don't want to see anything in your project design that involves charging inmates for any of this programming. There is some ability for jails to charge inmates for things like work release. That's embedded in the TCA. That's not what I'm talking about here. But if you're asking for money to support programming for inmates, that the costs of that programming needs to be built into the grant and doesn't need to come out of inmates' pockets. So that's something we'll be looking for. Other things apply to all grants that we do. You're not allowed to lobby with this money. You're not allowed to do bonuses. You're not allowed to pay for anything that happened outside the project period. So your grant won't start until, say, October 1st. You're not allowed to pay for something you bought in the summertime. Again, you don't have to memorize all of this, but I mainly want to call your attention to the allowables to give you, the ideas of what sorts of things you can really support with these funds. Two things, we have heard some murmuring on the ground through the winter. We went around and did strong R training as well as MRT training for the local jails. That was done through TDOC and TCI. And I'm sure many of you were part of those trainings. We did hear some frustrations about having the staff to do a risk needs assessment properly or to do MRT programming in-house. This money can help to support a salary position to do those things. So think through that. If you've already received the strong R training and you have the MOU with TDOC, but you just don't have enough warm bodies to do the RNA in the way that it needs to be done, think about what you need to make that happen, and we would love to support that with this money. The other thing that I will mention here is a very technical thing, but you're all going to be county agencies that are applying for these monies and spending them. You must follow your internal procurement policies when you are spending these monies. So if you are purchasing equipment, if you are entering into professional contracts, subcontracts, you must follow your internal procurement policy and to do that. Just because we approve, purchase of, a bunch of projectors or some kind of big fancy piece of equipment that you need for a vocational program, You still have to run that through all the normal procurement channels that you would normally have to do. If that means going in front of your commission, you have to do that. If that means going through some other process, approval process, you still have to do that. Us approving it does not circumvent your local policies with regard to procurement. Just checking other messages here. Okay. I think there's a side chat happening, you all, if you're okay. Yeah, Kelly, do you want to say some about that?
Sure. So with regard to the funding for additional staff to administer the RNAs, I just wanted to give the clarification that any of those new hires would need to go through the training that we conducted. So even though you've sent people to the training, you have an MOU with us, so you have active licenses. In order for those new individuals to use those licenses or conduct those RNAs, they would have to go through the same training, which we would provide. I just wanted to make that clarification.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, and we are planning on funding another round of those trainings in fiscal year 23, and those are offered at no expense to the agencies. We even will pay for, your travel and stuff if you're more than 50 miles from the location that the training is offered in. So, and William Wallace saying TCI will schedule further regional trainings with TDOC in fiscal year 23. Okay. All right. This is some very logistical stuff. This is really just intended to make it as easy as possible for you to get started. The smart code on the left goes to OCJP's grant applications page. This is a screenshot of what you'll see when you go to that page. You have to click on this FY23 evidence-based programming to collect or expand that section, and then you'll see all this information. The Pew Clearinghouse is linked here. The list of vocational programming is linked here. There's also a nice, really pretty little PDF that TBR and TCAT supplied us that have these nice explanations of some of those vocational programs. So that's really helpful. There's there will be a link to this informational webinar once we post it. And then of course at the bottom, there's the link to the 2 documents that you'll need in order to do this application. One is the intent to apply, and the other is the application itself, which is really the solicitation packet. And that's what you want. You click on that and that's going to give you everything you need. It has all of the information, all the background, and then it also has the links to the scope and the budget document. So it's that last thing, that application due July 29th. That's what you want to go and pull as soon as you can and just start looking through it to make sure that you are, prepared to fill out all of the documents and submit them. It's a little bit of a process. It's a packet that you'll need to complete. So make sure you check that out. All right, going into a little bit more guidance on the scope and the budget. The scope is a Word document that that has a bunch of questions and sections. You will go in and you will answer those questions and sort of address those different sections. Each of those sections is weighted. We're looking for particular elements in each of those sections. The review team will consist of a lot of folks actually on this call today, the state folks. They're basically the experts in this project. They will be reviewing that document and scoring it based on what information you provided. The ultimate score that your application receives will determine the level of funding that you receive. There's also a budget document. It is an Excel document. This is all explained in the solicitation, but you will have a separate budget for fiscal year 23, fiscal year 24, and fiscal year 25. You're going to have 3 years of budget documents that lay out what do we want to do in year 1, what do we want to do in year 2, and what do we want to do in year 3. This is just to give you kind of an idea of the level of information that we're looking for. This is a real example from, I think, the first round of EBP funding that we did. So the top here is what was originally submitted to us. They said, you know, it said list each piece of equipment, and they just said, oh, we'll be computers and a laptop and a projector and the moral recognition curriculum, the MRT, training. You know, they just listed everything out. We went back and we worked closely with them to help them understand why we need all of that broken out so that we know where the money is going. This is in the scope. So this is what they came back with and said, okay, we'll have a position. This is what they will do. This is what they will require. This is approximately how much it will cost. So you can see sort of the differences there, and yours might be a little bit different, but you know, depending on the type of programming that you're going to want to do. But we do need a good bit of information. Also, I'll call your attention to this big, bold, highlighted piece here again. If you are going to do an evidence-based program from the Pew list or a vocational program from the TDOC list, you need to name the specific program. If it's on the Pew list, what is the actual name of it as it's listed on the Pew Clearinghouse? And if it's the vocational program, it's a little more straightforward, but which program is it, and which, you know, which prison is it that's currently offering it? Is TCAT offering it? And that sort of thing. And then this is all addressed in the questions, but we will want to know, you know, how many classes will it consist of? How many students or, you know, inmates in each program will, you know, is it the kind of program that only 5 at a time can do? Or is it the kind that, you know, 25 can do? Is it a virtual kind of thing that they do like on a tablet? Is it a workbook thing that they do? Is it a classroom type activity? What all materials are required? I mean, really go into as much detail as you can in the scope. And again, there are very detailed questions in the scope that will guide you through that. I do also want to mention that you all will have an annual report that you will do for this grant each year. It's pretty straightforward, and there are questions on the scope that very much mirror the type of questions that you'll be asked in the annual report. But if you want to know what that looks like, what that annual report looks like, we have it up because, as I mentioned, we have agencies that are currently receiving EBP funding right now. And so you can just Google OCJP reporting, go to the OCJP reporting page and click on the EBP tab, and you can see that report. If you're the type who wants to kind of see what sort of information you want to track on the front end here. If that's just too much for you to sort of wrap your mind around right now, that's totally fine. If and when you are awarded these funds, a program manager will work very, very closely with you to make sure you understand all the reporting requirements and where to find it. We'll walk you through all of that. So that is all I have for you on this PowerPoint. Again, the deadline for this is July 29th. Please pick a list from the approved lists. And Department of Labor and Workforce Development is working on purchasing tablets through a state contract. So if you have a need for tablets for the inmates, we just encourage you to reach out to them, but as part of your planning for this, to make sure that you have that information and you're plugged into that, and just so that we don't have redundancies where they think they're buying you tablets and you also put tablets in this grant. Because if you're getting them through Department of Labor and Workforce Development, you would not put them in this grant. These funds should be for things that you're going to pay for, not for something that you've contracted with the state to pay for. The contact for the tablet information is in the chat. Debbie has put it in there, and it's Latoya Newson, and that's in the chat. Other questions? I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so we can see faces again.
I think Kelly has a hand.
Go ahead, Kelly.
And I should have mentioned this earlier when I was talking about the RNAs. Folks that are already have been through the training and the grant process and have MOUs, you already know this, but for those that don't, when I mentioned the strong RNA, also those licenses, once you go through the training, if you're a new grantee, licenses for you to use the risk and needs assessment in your program, those will be at no cost to you. Those actually are covered under the TDOC site license for RNAs. So when you're thinking of like your budgets and everything like that for this grant, if you intend to use the strong R, those licenses will not cost you anything.
Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, there was some discussion last week about, RNA tools and which ones to use. I'll just also throw in that, I was lucky enough to attend those trainings in the winter, and Anna Stewart and her team are super friendly and helpful and knowledgeable. And so if you do enter into an MOU with TDOC to use the strong R, that comes with a lot of support. And assistance and handholding if you need that. And those have been put into place. Some of that support has been put into place specifically in anticipation of this program of jails taking up the strong R as their RNA. So just consider that when you're deciding on which RNA to use. Your application will also receive additional points in the scoring process if you demonstrate that you have an RNA in place or an MOU with TDOC to use the strong R. Will, Jason, anything to add from TCI's side of things?
I'll just say that, quick question. When is this recording going to be available for dissemination to locals? It is a bit disappointing seeing that there's not many local agencies on this webinar, but I'd like to push it out for informational purposes to them. That way everyone has an opportunity to review your information. That way it cuts down on them overloading your office with questions or the Department of Correction about classes, because this will be very informative for them in the future for those who aren't participating.
You mean when will this recorded webinar be posted on the website?
Yes.
Or be made available? As soon as we can get it trimmed and posted, maybe this week.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Others, Debbie, anything to mention from your group?
I don't have anything at this point, Jessica. If anyone has any questions, we'll be happy to talk to them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, well, again, I appreciate everyone's time. This information will be available, and if you all have questions with regard to the application, please reach out to the email address that's listed on the solicitation and on the posting and on the scope, which is Criminal Justice Program. Let's see, it's Criminal Justice Programs.tn.gov. And the reason we do it like that is so that it's competitive. These are competitive grants, so everyone gets the same information. So if you reach out to that email address with a question, we'll save that question and answer, and we'll post it as an FAQ on the website so that everyone can see what all questions have been asked and what was the answer to that question. And that way we ensure that everyone has access to the same information as they're building their applications and competing for these funds. All right, well, thank you all so much for your time, and we appreciate you and look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
See y'all. Thanks.